Now, next step, split again. So we get 2, 2, 2. Slide frames outward to make spaces in positions 3 and 6. Okay? And we should start seeing a pattern here. Next step, insert waxed and wide frames or safe drawn comb in positions 3 and 6. So you can see here now we've basically rotated half the frames within a month to a month and a half period. Okay? Next step, after 2 weeks but no more than 3 weeks, we're starting to see this pattern, right? It's so methodical, it's just so standard. Like step 1, we can take these out and harvest them, or we can move them up into the honey super. If we're moving them up into the honey super, we shake them off again, move them up into the middle, and the other frames get moved across. So now we should have 6 frames of honey up in the honey super, or 6 frames of drawn comb that the bees are happily working and producing honey in. But we also have all of this fresh wax down in the brood box. Next step, we're sliding the frames out again. Okay? So we've got the first frame rotation frames are now on the edge, and we're sort of up to our 3rd rotation. New frames going. Okay? So same again. Waxed and wide or safe drawn comb. Alright? So if we do the same again next time, we're going to be removing frames that were pulled out, and these 2 frames in the middle will never get rotated. Okay, so on this step, well, we can either stop. So I've put a pause in here because now we're approaching sort of the 1.5 to 2 month mark.
In October now.
Yeah, we're sort of in October. So now we need to work out whether they're still expanding, whether it's a long spring, whether the population's still increasing. If it is, then we need to continue our frame rotation. And it's not like our frame rotation is going to stop us making honey or stop us doing anything, because by moving the frames 1 and 8 up into the honey super, we're effectively filling the honey super anyway, right? But instead of just plonking a honey super full of waxed and wide foundation on the top and hoping the bees will go in, which oftentimes they won't, what we're doing is we're moving those frames up and we're actively managing the beehive. Okay? So if it's expanding, we're going to keep doing the frame rotation. If it's not, we can pause. Okay? We don't need to stop, but we pause because we're constantly checking. And if we find the population's increasing again, we restart the process. Okay? If we do need to continue frame rotation, and it's more likely than not that you should. Okay? You should keep going. What we do is we remove the last 2 of the old frames. Okay? Yeah.
Andrew, last year we had a really strange start to spring, if you remember.
Yes.
Because we had a lot of rain, and what you would have noticed by this stage is that some of those new frames that we put in, after 2 weeks they haven't been drawn out.
Yeah.
Because the nectar flow started really late, didn't start until almost October, November. Mm-hmm. So if you go in and you find that the frames that you did last time haven't been drawn out, well then just put the lid down and
set your timer for another week or 2.
Yeah, just reset it.
Yeah, so any time we stop frame rotation, we're never really stopping, we're pausing. The only time we really stop is once we're past that swarming period and the population's stabilised. Okay? Alright.
Can I just ask, so we're assuming you've got a single brood box, and when you put the super on, if you had it or not, you might have put in 8 wired frames with foundation. And they're the ones that are going to go down as you rotate things up.
Absolutely. That's what I do. It doesn't have to be that way. You can put in new ones that pull out or whatever. But yeah, that's the best way to do it.
To make stickies that you're going to...
Exactly. To make this sort of movement.
Yeah.
It's almost like that, actually.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a convective movement.
And what if you have a full depth brood and then you have ideals?
Yeah, you can do it. You can do the same. So if you've got full depth brood and ideals, you can either do what I do, which is split the hive rather than do it, and you don't need to split 1 to 1. We can talk about this later. Or you can remove an ideal from positions 4 and 5, and underneath positions 4 and 5, and a full depth goes in the top ideal. So you have 2 ideal boxes.
Yeah.
A full depth is
I've
set.
done it before, then they draw a comb on the bottom.
You left it too long. Yeah. It's you need to be careful. But even if it does draw out at the bottom, it's all going to be honey.
That's true.
And you just cut it off and make a video for TikTok. ASMR, and then you sell it, and then people subscribe, and then you take your photos of your feed.
Put an empty box on the brood box, say in August, would that
What, you put the what, sorry?
an empty box on top of the brood box?
Yeah. You treat that the same way as you would treat a honey super then. So this frame rotation will work between 2 brood boxes as well.
Yeah. She'll move up in this new one.
Yeah, she will. Yeah, so it depends, right? So double brood, how many people are running double brood boxes here? Gee, that's a lot of people, isn't it? Okay.
You're preaching to
That's because
the
we preach that.
Oh, you preach that?
The simple answer is with 2 brood boxes, instead of the vendor saying exactly the same procedure, but instead of putting it above the queen excluder, you put it below the active brood box. Or if the active brood box is the one one, you put it on top of that. So you just do the interchanging within the 2 brood
Within
boxes.
the 2 brood boxes rather than above the honey super.
So
You'll find in spring usually your bottom brood box is empty.
Totally empty. Yeah, so normally your first step before you start this is to rotate the brood boxes, and then you're working within a standard format, even though you're weird and you're doing it differently. Yeah.
I don't have flow height, but does the flow height does the same method?
Absolutely works perfectly. Yeah.
Same
You just need to, if you're pulling out 2 frames from the bottom because of the unfortunate width of the flow hive, you just need to take out 2 flow frames and put it in. One other issue just with the flow hive for those who have it is when you lift up those frames, the flow box works beautifully as just a normal honey super and the frames fit in. But it's got a natural bias on it that tilts backwards so that the honey flows out. So if you want your frames that you're lifting up to sit nice and level, you go and buy sushi and then you snap the chopsticks after you finish eating the delicious sushi. And you put that under the little ears on the back of the frames, and that one chopstick measurement exactly is enough to level those frames. So yeah, it's exactly, they must have done it up there. They love sushi in Byron Bay, so it must have been a measurement that they chose. One chopstick. Yeah, well, the disposable chopsticks, they've probably got lovely ones made of bamboo. Yeah, ivory. Ivory. All right. So, again, so now we're removing the last 2, okay? And the question's going to be, is normally asked, how do I know which frames I'm up to or whatever, because I don't keep good records, I don't want to do that sort of thing. What I recommend is whenever you put a frame into a hive, put the date on it. Just write the date with a marker pen on the top, and then you will be able to open it up and have a look along your top bars of your hive and work out exactly which ones you need to move out. Because all of these ones will have this year's date on it, and these 2 will have last year's. So you can just swap it over. Okay? Now, if we're pulling these ones up and we're moving them up, we do the same thing, we shake them off. But in this instance, they will almost certainly have brood because we're removing them from the middle. And that's not a problem because we're a fair way into spring right now. You know, we're probably budding up to nearly summer, probably not, but we're getting quite late into spring. So there's enough bees to keep the brood warm, and even though we're going to move the brood up above the queen excluder. Okay, and these bees won't die, they'll just hatch out, move back down, and away we go. Okay, but we do need to make sure, doubly sure in this instance, that we shake the bees off, and there's no bees that we're lifting up in case it is the queen. Okay, and it's absolutely critical in this instance that they're in positions 4 and 5. Okay, and that's to keep the cluster of bees around the brood centralised. If you put them out on the outside edge, they could get chilled. Okay. So, in this instance, we don't spread apart because we've got the gap in the middle. We move from positions 3 and 6 inwards. Okay? And that's again to get this 2-2-2 pattern. Then, same rotation. Insert wax and wide frames or safe drawn comb, and away we go. And in this instance, we've got brand new fresh comb in the bottom. We're not struggling to look for eggs on the frame because it's all beautiful fresh wax. At the same time, same way as when you first got your bees. You know, if you got them from someone good, you would have had really nice looking comb. Okay? And by doing this, it makes beekeeping a lot easier. You don't have that situation where you're trying to jam and wedge out, you know, frames and you're dealing with mould and all this sort of stuff. You're dealing with nice, fresh comb in the brood box, and you end up with a really nice beekeeping experience. Okay? Now for 10 frame it's exactly the same process, except there's one more rotation to be done to get all the frames rotated. Okay? And I've just said that about the rotation. You are continuing. There's no problem with continuing this constantly. If you do this appropriately, you will make more honey than if you don't rotate, because you won't have swarming. All the bees will in there. You'll end up with a really nice big colony, all of which ready to go for summer, which is really our peak season. Now, I've just said all that, but there are other advantages. New wax reduces residual pesticide and herbicides in wax. It reduces residual miticide contamination. So if anyone's in the purple zone and the DPI's called you and put in Varroa strips, it does contaminate the beeswax. So has anyone had that happen, where they've put strips in your hives? Yeah, so that's good. The beeswax that's in there, when it was in there, it's only going to be minor because the period that they put it in is a matter of days rather than a matter of weeks. But it does contaminate the wax, and it's something where you'd like to rotate it out. Okay. New wax will reduce the background AFB spore count. So AFB is obviously a dirty word, and I was worried about putting it up, but the AFB is measured in spore counts, and by rotating wax out, we're getting rid of spores that may have built up and may be harboured within the comb of the wax. It's when it reaches a certain threshold that then we start getting the clinical signs of AFB and we have to act. But by doing this, we can keep the background count quite low. And also having bees build wax also encourages hygienic behaviour. You'll end up with just a neater, nicer hive within the hive. They won't be reusing, reworking old wax. You'll lose a lot of that sort of the sloppy dust that you'll get sometimes in the bottom of the hive. There'll be less of that because there'll be less reworking of old comb and more generation of new fresh wax. Okay? It's also nice. Now, splitting. The reason I'm putting splitting up is it's better to do frame rotation. But if you're looking at this, like I look at my bees and I go, I can't get to every beehive every 2 to 3 weeks, rain, hail or shine. Okay, I can't do that. Then I need to start looking at potentially doing splitting as an option as well. Okay, and the reason that splitting is more of a viable option this year than other years is because if you're in the purple zone and your bees swarm, they'll die. If you split beforehand and that stops a swarm, then they're basically saved, you know, so by stopping swarming using this technique. Okay? Now there are two types of swarms. One's called a walkaway split, and the other one's called an artificial swarm, and it's based on whether or not you can find the queen, but also how much time you want to allocate to doing a split. Okay? You can do a walkaway split in about 3.5 minutes. You can do an artificial swarm, depending on how good you are at finding the queen, in anything from 10 minutes to about 4.5 hours with a lot of swearing. So there are a lot of variables, but the walkaway split is certainly faster, and it's the method that I adopt when I do splitting. Okay? Now, all scenarios assume some pollen and honey on brood frames. The reason I've said this is because now, forget all the colours that were before. These colours, a lot of them are exactly the same, but they're not the same as before. That's totally clear, right? So basically we've got, it's a bit hard to see, but we've got honey, pollen, that should be capped brood, yep, capped brood, and then this lighter grey, which looks very similar to the black, is uncapped brood. Okay? Can you see the differentiation? Yeah. Alright. Now, artificial swarm. So this is, if you are okay at finding the queen, this is the best case scenario because it means you know what's going on. With a walkaway split, you don't really know what's going on. You're just sort of playing catch up afterwards. So, artificial swarm. What we're doing here is, in a swarm, the old queen leaves with 1/3 to half the colony, but most of the bees that it leaves with, or the queen leaves with, are foragers, okay? Because they're better at flying, they've been outside, it's just a larger contingent of what they leave with, okay? So what we're trying to do is, because this is an artificial swarm, we're trying to replicate that. Now, in this, there are two locations. There is the original location and the new location, and that's the case with both of these. What we need to remember is, in the original location, that's going to have all the forages. Even if we move forages to the new location, they're going to fly back to the original location unless we move them 5 k's or more away. Okay? So, what we're doing here is we've got the queen in the original location. We have the queen with a little bit of honey, some pollen, and some capped brood. One frame of capped brood. It doesn't seem like a lot. Okay? The weaker hive in these two is this hive. So the hive that's got 1 frame of capped brood, 2 frames of uncapped brood, pollen and honey, this is going to be the weaker hive because this hive has all the forages. All the forages are going to be building new wax, bringing in new resources. This hive has the queen. So when these bees hatch, she's going to be laying straight away back into those same cells, making new bees and reinvigorating the colony with new population. Okay? The forages are going to help by building out these waxed and wired frames into drawn comb. So there's a lot of, even though we're leaving the original hive with not much, they've got the easiest road here. Okay? The new location, as I said, has capped brood. It's got 2 frames of uncapped brood because what we're doing is we're assuming we don't have a new queen in a cage in our hand. If we did, we'd pop her in here. But if we don't, we've got 2 frames of uncapped brood so they can make their own. We've got pollen and honey. Okay, but we don't have, most importantly, we don't have a queen and we don't have any forages. Okay, so what we've got to do is, in this instance, we've got to monitor both hives. We've got to check firstly that this hive is progressing along. Should be fine. Should be a lot of activity outside. This hive will look like there are no bees in it at all for a period until a lot of the bees that come over here on these frames start progressing from being house bees to learning to be foragers. Okay? So, I'll talk about what we're going to check for in a little bit, but it's important to know in this instance that the original hive will have the queen and the foragers, the new hive will have the uncapped brood to make a new queen, and the lion's share of the resources because they don't have foragers bringing them in.
Do you recommend feeding that new location or not?
Can do. Yeah, absolutely can do. What my preference is always to give them honey rather than feed them. You can feed them, it does stimulate them, it works well. I want to also encourage them to get out and forage, and I find when you feed them it can delay them foraging a bit. It might just be me sort of making it up a bit, but I find that typically giving them honey, making sure there's resources, and getting them out foraging, it works very well. Typically I also pair, so the hives are always paired together, and I'm happy to move resources from one hive to the other while we're in that split situation. We can move from the hive with the foragers. They're going to start bringing in more honey, start laying in nectar on the new frames. If these ones eat through their honey and don't have any more, well then we'll bring that frame of honey over and give it over to these ones. Okay? We'll let those foragers work for this hive. Yep?
Andrew, the key thing with this split, because you've got the queen, is do not put too much brood in there.
No.
So if you've got 6 frames of brood, right, 5 go to the new location, you only ever leave 1 frame of brood with the queen. Because remember, she thinks that she's swarmed, and we know that she doesn't take brood with her.
Yep.
So with the brood is just